Hello and welcome to the World War Lab channel. Today, we're diving into a moment where seconds decided survival, where steel met steel, and where a single crew carried the only weapon capable of changing the outcome. Now, let's return to Normandy, June 1944. At 14:27 on June 14, 1944, Sergeant Gordon Harris was crouched inside his Sherman Firefly on the eastern edge of Lingèvres in Normandy, watching 5 German Panther tanks roll forward across open fields roughly 800 meters away. He was 31 years old. He had been in Normandy for only 8 days. He had 0 confirmed tank kills. In just 6 days, the British 7th Armored Division had already lost 42 Sherman tanks. German Panthers and Tigers ruled the battlefield. Every engagement seemed to end the same way. The standard Sherman 75mm gun simply could not penetrate a Panther's frontal armor beyond 300 meters. The Germans understood this perfectly, which is why they attacked straight on, confident in their superiority. Harris commanded the only vehicle in his squadron that could destroy a Panther at long range, the Sherman Firefly. It was a controversial machine, a hybrid that British military leadership had tried to kill off 3 separate times before D-Day. Back in January 1943, the Ministry of Supply had rejected the idea of mounting Britain's massive 17-pounder anti-tank gun inside an American Sherman turret. They said it was impossible. The gun was too large. The turret was too small. Britain, they argued, had better tanks on the way, the Challenger and the Cromwell. There was no reason to waste time and resources on a strange hybrid nobody had officially asked for. But at the Lulworth Armored Fighting School, Major George Bridie ignored them. He welded a 17-pounder directly into a Sherman turret anyway. There was no proper recoil system. The gun was locked rigid. When it fired, the entire tank absorbed the shock. It barely worked, but it worked. The ministry ordered him to stop. In June 1943, Lieutenant Colonel George Wyderidge joined the legal project. He had been wounded earlier at Gazala in North Africa, when his Grant tank was knocked out. He understood on a personal level what inferior guns cost in human lives. Together, Bridie and Wyderidge solved the recoil problem, redesigned the breech mechanism, cut a new hatch for the gunner, moved the radio into an external armored box welded onto the rear of the turret, and removed the hull machine gunner position entirely to create room for the massive 17-pounder ammunition. The ministry discovered the work and ordered them to stop again. This time, Wyderidge went over their heads. He used his connections with Major General Raymond Briggs and Claude Gibb at the Ministry of Supply. He argued that the Challenger tank program was failing. The Cromwell's turret ring was too narrow to accept the 17-pounder. The Firefly, he insisted, was Britain's only realistic option before the Normandy invasion. In November 1943, the ministry finally gave it approval for production. By May 31, 1944, only 342 Fireflies had been completed. That meant roughly 1 Firefly for every 4 tanks in a troop. British armored regiments entered Normandy critically short of vehicles capable of fighting Panthers on equal terms. The Germans learned quickly. Within 3 days of D-Day, Panzer commanders recognized the Firefly by its distinctively longer barrel. Orders spread across German armored units. Destroy the Fireflies first, always. Firefly crews tried to hide their identity by covering their barrels in mud, paint, and wire mesh, hoping to make them look like standard Shermans from a distance. It almost never worked. Harris had been a gunner until 4 days earlier. On June 10th, his tank commander was killed near Tilly-Circel when a Panther round punched straight through the turret. It was a direct hit. The commander was dead before the smoke had even cleared. Harris inherited command of the tank on the spot. His gunner was Trooper Alec McKillop, 24 years old, Scottish, with steady hands and sharp eyes. McKillip had fired exactly 7 rounds in combat so far. 3 had missed, 4 had struck German half-tracks. He had never fired at a tank. If you want to see how Harris and McKillop faced 5 German Panthers, please hit that like button. It helps these stories reach more people. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. Now, back to Harris. The 5 Panthers spread out into a line formation. They carried Panzer Lehr division markings. They were advancing directly toward Lingèvres, where British infantry had dug in and established defensive positions. 3 standard Shermans were positioned behind nearby buildings. Their 75mm guns were useless at this range. Harris's Firefly was the only real chance. 800 meters, 700, 650. At their current speed, the Panthers would reach effective firing range in about 90 seconds. Harris maneuvered his Firefly behind a stone wall on the outskirts of the village. He placed the tank in a hull-down position, with only the turret exposed. The 17-pounder's barrel extended nearly 4 feet longer than a standard Sherman's gun, making it impossible to conceal completely. McKillip sat to Harris's left. The loader crouched behind them. The driver was forward in the hull. A 4-man crew. The Firefly had no hull machine gunner. That position had been sacrificed to make space for the enormous 17-pounder ammunition. Each shell weighed 38 pounds, almost twice the weight of a standard Sherman round. The Panther was Germany's answer to the Soviet T-34 on the Eastern Front. 45 tons of sloped armor and firepower. Its 75mm KWK-42 gun could penetrate 4 inches of armor at 1,000 meters. The frontal armor measured 80mm at a 55-degree angle, giving an effective thickness of roughly 140mm. Side armor was 50mm. Rear armor was 40mm. Top speed was 28 miles per hour on roads. Its only real weaknesses were its sides, its rear, and its unreliable mechanics. German crews called it the best medium tank in the world. The Sherman Firefly weighed 33 tons. Its armor was no more than 3 inches thick at best. Top speed was 25 miles per hour. It was inferior to the Panther in almost every category except one: the 17-pounder gun. That gun fired at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Using standard armor-piercing capped ammunition, it could penetrate 163mm of armor at 500 meters and 150mm at 1,000 meters. That was more than enough to punch through a Panther's frontal armor. The British had also developed armor-piercing, discarding sabot rounds that could penetrate up to 256mm of armor, but those rounds were inaccurate beyond 500 meters and tended to foul the barrel. Harris carried 12 sabot rounds and 65 standard armor-piercing rounds. The Firefly could kill Panthers if the gunner aimed true. McKillip tracked the lead Panther through his telescopic sight. Range, 600 meters. The Panther's commander stood in the cupola, scanning the horizon for threats. McKillip adjusted for wind, for distance, for the target's movement. The recoil of the 17-pounder was brutal. After every shot, both the gunner and commander had to blink or risk temporary blindness from a muzzle flash. The flash was so intense that hedgerows sometimes caught fire after a single shot. Dry undergrowth would ignite instantly. The Firefly's position would be revealed at once. 550 meters. The Panthers maintained their formation, advancing at a steady pace toward the village. McKillip's breathing slowed, becoming controlled and deliberate. His finger rested just beside the firing mechanism. Harris had trained gunners before the war, and he recognized the signs instantly. McKillip was ready, steady, calm, the kind of gunner who made shots others could not. Harris needed him to make 5 perfect shots. 5 Panthers, one after another, before the Germans identified the Firefly's exact position, before return fire destroyed them, before the Panthers closed to a range where their own guns became unstoppable. There was no margin for error. 500 meters. Harris checked his watch. It was 14:29. 2 minutes had passed since the Panthers first appeared. The commander of the lead Panther dropped down into his turret. The hatch slammed shut. Combat ready. They knew British tanks were nearby. They were hunting. McKillip centered his sight on the lead Panther's frontal glacis, right where the armor met the turret ring, the weakest point on a Panther's front. At this distance, a 17-pounder round would reach the target in less than a second. There would be no time for the German crew to react. McKillip's hand moved the trigger. At 14:30, McKillip fired. The 17-pounder erupted. The recoil slammed the entire tank backward nearly 6 inches. A brilliant orange flash blinded Harris for 2 seconds. The hedgerow 10 feet in front of the Firefly ignited instantly. Smoke poured from the burning vegetation. Through the clearing smoke, Harris saw the lead Panther. The round had struck perfectly, punching through the glacis just below the turret ring. The Panther rolled forward 3 meters and stopped. Smoke leaked from its hatches. No fire, no explosion. The crew was already dead inside, for Panthers remained. They scattered immediately, without hesitation. Professional crews. The second Panther veered left. The third and fourth broke to the right. The fifth Panther reversed hard, backing away at speed. The smoke from the burning hedge marked the Firefly's position clearly. The Germans now knew exactly where the shot had come from. Harris had perhaps 15 seconds before return fire. McKillip traversed the turret to the right, tracking the third Panther as it maneuvered. The German tank was moving at nearly 12 miles per hour, turning, trying to angle its armor. McKillip led the target, adjusted for movement, and fired. The 17-pounder roared again. Flash, recoil. The round struck the Panther's side armor at the suspension. It penetrated cleanly. The Panther's ammunition detonated. The turret lifted nearly 8 feet into the air, flipped, and crashed back down upside down. Orange flames erupted from the hull. 2 Panthers destroyed in 40 seconds. The remaining 3 Panthers opened fire simultaneously. 3 75mm rounds screamed toward the stone wall. One struck 20 feet to the left and exploded harmlessly. One hit the wall directly, showering the Firefly with stone fragments. The third passed overhead, close enough that Harris heard it whistle past the turret. The Germans were ranging in. The next salvo would be accurate. Harris ordered the driver to reverse. The Firefly backed up 20 feet into a new position behind a barn. The move took only seconds. McKillip reloaded as the loader heaved another 38-pound shell into the breech and slammed it shut. McKillip scanned for targets. The second Panther had completed its circle to the left and was now moving toward the village from the northwest, attempting to flank them. The fourth and fifth Panthers advanced in the east in a split attack. Classic German armored tactics, dividing defensive fire. McKillip chose the flanking Panther. Range, 450 meters. The German tank was moving fast, presenting its frontal armor. A harder shot. McKillip tracked its movement, led the target by 3 tank lengths, and fired. The round struck low, penetrating the lower glacis and smashing into the transmission. The Panther lurched forward and stopped, immobilized. The crew bailed out immediately, scrambling for cover. 3 Panthers down, 2 still mobile. The remaining 2 Panthers fired again. Both rounds slammed into barn. What exploded. The structure partially collapsed. Dust and debris filled the air. The Firefly was now exposed. The barn no longer offered protection. The Germans had them ranged in. The fourth Panther was only 400 meters away and closing fast. Its gun traversed toward the Firefly. McKillip had perhaps 3 seconds before it fired at near point-blank range. 1 shot, 1 chance. McKillip fired first. The 17-pounder round crossed 400 meters in less than a second and struck the fourth Panther's gun mantlet, the thickest armor on the tank, 120 millimeters of cast steel. The round penetrated anyway, punched through the mantlet, through the gun breech, and into the turret. The Panther's ammunition cooked off instantly. The explosion was catastrophic. The turret separated from the hull, flipped end over end, and landed nearly 30 feet away. 4 Panthers destroyed or disabled. 1 remained. The 5th Panther had stopped advancing. Its commander understood what was happening. 4 tanks lost in under 2 minutes. The Firefly was lethal. Continuing the attack meant certain death. The Panther began reversing, backing slowly toward the tree line, trying to break contact. Range, 520 meters and increasing. Harris made a decision. Let it go. 5 German tanks had attacked. 4 destroyed or disabled. 1 was retreating. The mission was accomplished. The village was safe. British infantry could hold their positions. But Harris also knew what happened when German tanks escaped. They reported. They warned other units. By nightfall, every Panzer commander within 10 miles would know a Firefly was operating near Lingèvres. They would come hunting, with more tanks, better tactics, and infantry support. McKillip kept his sight on the retreating Panther. Range, 540 meters, then 560. The Panther was reversing faster now, nearly 10 miles per hour. Its commander stood in the cupola again, watching the Firefly, waiting to see if pursuit would follow. German doctrine emphasized the preservation of armor. Losing 4 tanks was catastrophic. Surviving to report it was vital was catastrophic. Losing 5 was unacceptable. Harris weighed his options. He could pursue and risk an ambush. The tree line could conceal more Panthers, anti-tank guns, or Panzerfaust teams waiting in cover. Or he could let the tank escape and face coordinated retaliation later. Neither choice was good. Harris checked his ammunition. 61 17-pounder rounds remained, including 12 sabot rounds. The Firefly's engine was running hot from constant maneuvering. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, enough for several more hours of fighting if needed. The 5th Panther reached the tree line at around 600 meters. It paused. The turret traversed left, then right. The commander was scanning, searching for threats, searching for opportunity. Then the Panther turned, presenting its side armor, and began moving parallel to the tree line. It was no longer retreating. It was repositioning. Harris understood immediately. The German commander was not running. He was setting up a long-range duel. The Panther's 75mm gun was accurate out to 1,000 meters. At 600 meters, it had a clean, lethal shot, and now the Panther knew exactly what a Firefly was. The collapsed barn, the burning hedgerow, the stone wall. Every landmark was burned into the German crew's memory. Every previous firing position was compromised. The Panther stopped, hull down behind a slight rise in terrain, with only its turret visible. The gun elevated slightly as it aimed. The German crew was ready, experienced, patient. They would wait for Firefly to expose itself and then fire. One accurate hit was all they needed. The Firefly's armor could not stop a Panther round at this range. McKillip centered his sight on the visible turret. Range, 610 meters. It was a difficult shot. Only the turret was exposed. A small target, a moving target. The Panther commander knew exactly how to fight Fireflies. Harris ordered the driver forward. The Firefly moved 15 feet to the right, changing its angle and creating a new firing position. The Panther's gun tracked the movement immediately. Both tanks were now aiming at each other, 600 meters apart. Both commanders understood that the next shot would decide everything. McKillip adjusted his aim. Only about 20 degrees of the Panther's turret arc was visible above the rise. The rest of the tank was protected by the terrain. The Panther fired first. The round screamed past the Firefly's left side, missing by barely 3 feet. Close enough that Harris felt the pressure wave slap against the turret. The German gunner had anticipated the Firefly, continuing its movement to the right. McKillip did not wait. He fired while the Panther's gun was still recoiling. The 17-pounder round flew true. It struck the Panther's turret face on the right side and penetrated the armor. The turret stopped traversing instantly. Smoke poured from the commander's cupola. The 5th Panther was finished. 14:33. 6 minutes since the engagement had begun. 5 German Panthers destroyed. 0 British tank losses. The 3 standard Shermans emerged from behind the village buildings. Their commanders had watched the entire fight. None of them had fired a single shot. Their guns could not reach that far. They could not penetrate that armor. The Firefly had fought alone. Harris scanned the tree line, searching for additional threats. The Germans rarely operated in groups of 5. Panthers usually deployed in platoons of 4 or in larger formations of 12 to 15. Where were the others? He keyed his radio and reported to squadron headquarters. 5 Panthers destroyed near Lingèvres. Request reconnaissance of eastern approaches. Need confirmation of no additional enemy armor in the area. The squadron commander responded immediately. Congratulations. Hold position. Infantry were moving up to secure the disabled Panthers. Prisoners, if possible. Intelligence wanted to examine the wrecks. Harris acknowledged. Inside the Firefly, his crew waited. McKillip's hands were shaking slightly as the adrenaline faded. The loader sat slumped against the turret wall, exhausted from manhandling 5 38-pound shells in barely 2 minutes. The driver reported that engine temperature was elevated but manageable. Harris climbed out of the turret and surveyed the battlefield. 4 Panthers were burning. 1 lay disabled, its crew having escaped. The entire engagement had lasted 6 minutes. 5 shots fired, 5 hits. Perfect accuracy at ranges between 400 and 600 meters against Germany's best medium tank. By a crew that had never destroyed a tank before this day. British infantry began advancing across the field, approaching the wrecked Panthers and securing the area. Harris watched them move. He knew what would follow. Reports would be written. Intelligence officers would arrive. Questions would be asked. How did 1 Firefly destroy 5 Panthers? What tactics were used? At what ranges? Every detail would be studied, analyzed, and documented. But Harris also knew something else. The Germans would study it too. They would learn that Fireflies were more dangerous than expected. They would develop new tactics, new formations. They would start hunting Fireflies with multiple tanks, with coordinated fire, with ambushes. Today's victory would make tomorrow harder. The war went on. Lingèvres was one village, one engagement. Thousands more lay ahead across France and into Germany. By 1600 hours, British intelligence officers arrived at Lingèvres. They examined the 5 destroyed Panthers, measured penetration holes, documented damage patterns, and interviewed Harris and McKillip, recording every detail of the engagement. The intelligence report would reach 21st Army Group headquarters by evening. By the next morning, it would be distributed to every British armored regiment in Normandy. The examination revealed critical information. All 5 Panthers belonged to the Panzer Lehr Division, Germany's elite armored training and demonstration unit. These were not inexperienced crews or second-line troops. They were veterans, many transferred from the Eastern Front, equipped with the best machines Germany could field. The fact that a single Firefly had destroyed 5 Panthers from Panzer Lehr validated every argument that Wydridge and Bridie had made 18 months earlier. The Firefly worked. It could fight Germany's best tanks and win. But the engagement also exposed the Firefly's weaknesses. The muzzle flash set hedgerows on fire and revealed its position instantly. The gun's length made maneuvering difficult in villages and bocage country. The lack of a hull gunner reduced crew flexibility. Loading the massive 17-pounder shells exhausted. Loaders quickly. Sustained combat drained crew stamina far faster than in standard Shermans. The Firefly was a specialist weapon, devastating when used correctly, but vulnerable when exposed and exhausted. Harris's after-action report included one detail that would later become legendary among British tank crews. During the entire engagement, Harris never shouted firing commands. Instead, he spoke quietly to McKillip. Calm instructions, steady corrections, make it count. The 17-pounder ammunition was expensive. Each round cost significantly more than standard Sherman shells. Harris treated every shot as precious, and McKillip responded with absolute discipline. 5 shots, 5 kills, not a single round wasted. The engagement at Lingèvres was not the only Firefly success. On June 14th, near Villers-Bocage, another Firefly destroyed 3 Panthers in a single afternoon engagement. At Tilly-sur-Seulles, a Canadian Firefly knocked out 2 Tigers. The pattern was becoming clear. When properly employed, the Firefly could dominate German armor. But Firefly crews were also learning hard lessons. The tank's distinctive silhouette made it an immediate priority target. German tank commanders adapted quickly, developing tactics specifically to counter Fireflies. Panzer crews began engaging Fireflies first, often from maximum possible range. They coordinated their fire, using some tanks to suppress Fireflies while others maneuvered. Infantry units were used to spot and mark Firefly positions. By mid-June 1944, Firefly's survival rates were becoming a concern. The tank was effective, but it was dangerously vulnerable. British commanders demanded more Fireflies. The Ministry of Supply accelerated production. By late June, almost 400 Fireflies had been delivered. Still not enough. Demand exceeded supply. Every regiment wanted more. Every engagement confirmed their value. The hybrid tank the Ministry had tried to kill 3 times had become Britain's most valuable armored weapon in Normandy. Harris and McKillip continued fighting. Their Firefly survived. But Normandy was only the beginning. Operation Epsom was coming. Operation Goodwood would follow. Between June 14th and August 25th, 1944, Harris and McKillip's Firefly destroyed 9 more German tanks, 3 Panthers, 4 Panzer IVs, and 2 Stoogie assault guns. 14 total tank kills in 72 days. They survived engagements at Villers-Bocage, Caen, and Falaise. Their Firefly was hit 11 times by German fire, 8 hits from machine guns, 2 from Panzerfaust rockets, and 1 from a 75mm tank round that struck the turret at an extreme angle and ricocheted. Each time, the crew escaped, repaired the tank, and returned to combat. McKillip never wasted ammunition. His accuracy remained exceptional. After Lingèvres, he fired 47 17-pounder rounds in combat and achieved 31 hits, a 66% accuracy rate under battlefield conditions against moving targets at ranges between 200 and 700 meters. The British 7th Armored Division recognized both men. Harris received the Military Cross in July. McKillip received the Military Medal. The citation specifically mentioned their actions at Lingèvres. 5 Panthers destroyed. Perfect shooting. Courage under fire. But most Firefly crews were not so fortunate. By August 1st, British forces in Normandy had lost 118 Fireflies, 43% of all Fireflies deployed. The German focus on killing Fireflies first was working. Panzer commanders refined their tactics. They used terrain to close distance quickly. They coordinated multiple tanks to overwhelm a single Firefly. They deployed Panzerfaust teams to attack from close range, where the Firefly's long gun was hardest to maneuver. Despite the losses, the Firefly's effectiveness was undeniable. Intelligent analysis from June through August showed that Fireflies accounted for 64% of all German heavy tank kills made by British forces. Panthers and Tigers were destroyed at nearly 3 times the rate achieved by standard Shermans. The 17-pounder gun had proven decisive. Armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition became more widely available by late July. With sabot rounds, Fireflies could penetrate even the frontal armor of Tiger II tanks at practical combat ranges. By late August, British armored regiments were receiving 2 Fireflies per 4-tank troop instead of 1. Production had increased dramatically. Conversion facilities in Britain were processing 60 Shermans per week into Fireflies. The Ministry of Supply, which had rejected the project twice, now made it a top priority. Winston Churchill personally monitored Firefly production numbers. The hybrid tank had become indispensable. Harris and McKillip fought through France into Belgium and Holland. Their Firefly was finally knocked out near Nijmegen in September during Operation Market Garden. A German 88mm anti-tank gun scored a direct hit to the engine compartment. The tank burned, but the crew escaped without injury. Harris and McKillip were reassigned to a new Firefly within 3 days. They continued fighting until Germany surrendered in May 1945. After the war, Harris returned to England and worked as a garage mechanic in Yorkshire. He rarely spoke about the war. McKillip returned to Scotland and became a schoolteacher. Both men survived. Both lived quiet lives. The engagement at Lingèvres became a small footnote in regimental histories. But the impact of the Sherman Firefly on the war was profound. Between D-Day and VE Day, approximately 2,100 Fireflies were converted and deployed. They served with British, Canadian, Polish, and Free French armored units across Northwest Europe and Italy. Fireflies destroyed an estimated 900 German tanks and assault guns, including Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer IVs. No other Allied tank matched this record against German heavy armor. The 17-pounder armed Firefly accounted for more German heavy tank kills than any other Allied armored vehicle in the European theater. The engagement at Lingèvres on June 14th became a training case study. British tank schools analyzed Harris and McKillop's tactics in detail. 5 Panthers destroyed in 6 minutes. Perfect accuracy under extreme pressure. Proper use of terrain. Absolute fire discipline. The engagement demonstrated exactly what Fireflies could achieve in the hands of skilled crews. It validated every argument that had ever been made for the program's existence. Tank commanders studied this battle for decades. The methods Harris used became standard doctrine for Firefly operations. But the deeper lesson went beyond tactics. It was about innovation in wartime. The Firefly almost never existed. It had been rejected 3 times by military bureaucracy. Built by 2 officers who ignored orders, approved only when conventional solutions failed. The hybrid tank that nobody wanted became the weapon British armored forces needed most. Sometimes the impossible solution is the only solution. The Ministry of Supply that tried to kill the project 3 times eventually made it the highest priority program in British tank production. The 17-pounder gun continued in service long after World War II. It equipped British tanks through the early Cold War. The Centurion tank mounted an improved version. The gun's basic design influenced post-war anti-tank weapon development for more than 2 decades. The Firefly itself was retired by 1946, replaced by newer British designs, such as the Comet and later the Centurion. Most Fireflies were scrapped for steel. Only a handful survive today in museums. The Tank Museum at Bovington displays a fully restored Sherman Firefly. The Imperial War Museum has another. The Musée de Blinds in France preserve a third. These are among the last remaining examples of the controversial hybrid that reshaped armored warfare in Northwest Europe. Harris died in 1987 at the age of 74. He worked as a garage mechanic in Yorkshire for 40 years after the war. McKillip died in 1993 at the age of 73. He taught mathematics at a secondary school in Edinburgh. Neither man wrote memoirs. Neither sought recognition beyond the medals they received in 1944. They were tank crew. They did their job, survived, and went home. The engagement at Lingèvres was 1 day in a long war. 5 Panthers destroyed. 6 minutes of combat. A footnote in regimental records. But for the British infantry defending that village, and for every tanker who later learned from their example, it mattered. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about tank commanders and gunners who face impossible odds with rejected weapons and perfect aim. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States? Canada? Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're a part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Harris and McKillip do not disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.